by way of a lot of different countries, and what they're trying to do is go into these different countries and infringe upon people's rights when it comes to private property, then I'll be against that. But I don't think you are going to find that in Agenda 21. I think that basically this is a Tea Party movement type deal, and they have fears that the government is always a spook behind the door. The government is going to come in one way or the other and take the guns and take the land and take the cows and the pigs.
I understand, but let me inquire of the sponsor. Is there any such language that you might be able to provide the senator at a later point?
Here's the thing. Let's just assume for a second that everything that the senator has said is correct. Okay? Because even if everything that she has said is correct, which certainly I don't agree with it, but even if everything that she said is correct, this bill should not be offensive to anybody who believes all of those things. Because as you pointed out, this bill simply protects a person from having those rights infringed without due process. And so whether we call it Agenda 21 or whether we call it flip side upside down, it doesn't matter what we call it. If we're taking away the ability for a person to have their rights infringed without due process, then that's what I'm in favor of. In fact, I don't even care if we call it Agenda 21. I don't care what we call it. I just don't want to see people have their property rights, their personal rights infringed without due process. And that's what this bill does.
Senator Nasheed, you were first.
I'm going to yield to the senator down there. Senator.
No. Oh. Senator Holzman, I saw him second.
Thank you. I understand you and I have had conversations about this bill, but what is, explain to me what exactly due process is. So if, let's say, let me give you an example. Let's say the City Council of Kansas City, since my City Councilman's here today, say the City Council of Kansas City decides that they're going to do an extension of the green zone that Manuel Cleaver helped create in Kansas City, and it's going to be a sustainable aspect to a different part of that community, and there's some property rights that come up, and they have the eminent domain, part of a blighted area. I'm not sure if it would fall into if what the eminent domain statutes for the city are already well defined, right, and what you can and cannot take. So let's assume that it is within the rights of the city to eminent domain this property, and it's for sustainable use. And someone comes back and brings a lawsuit against the city that says that in Agenda 21 they use the word sustainable, and you're eminent domaining this piece of property to expand this green zone, which sounds like an environmental plan, and that's also in the Agenda 21. I mean, they're going to be able to sue the city on these grounds, and what exactly would the due process look like to guarantee that this is actually a legitimate use of city zoning and ordinances?
So I don't think that a scenario like that would unfold unless we're going to apply that same logic to every single piece of legislation that we pass and say that the passage of this legislation could possibly open the door to something and then whatever it is that we imagine. So according to this legislation, in an example like you described, if indeed the city has clear policies that are constitutional and have an established process by which eminent domain would be used, then, of course, I don't know the exact details of what you're talking about. We're only talking about a loose hypothetical, but based on what you've described, I don't see where there would be a conflict with this bill.
What would be the due process? What does the due process look like? I mean, I hear what you're saying, and it says, and when Dr. Schaaf says it, it sounds very reasonable, but the devil's always in the details in this building. And what does due process mean?
Sure. Well, we would, to give the exact answer to that, we would have to actually look it up in statute. So I don't have that definition memorized, but what I do know in principle is due process is something that is in place to protect any and all of our constitutional rights. And so due process, whether we're talking about a DNA checkpoint or whether we're talking about people having their land taken away from them without going through the process that is in place, those are examples of due process. So due process is something that could be violated by any governmental entity, whether we're talking about DNA swabs or whether we're talking about land taking.
Well, you know how I feel about the privacy rights that you and I fight for, but I'm just curious, you mentioned that it's not about Agenda 21, it's not about the United Nations. If we struck all of the United Nations language in this bill and we replaced it with telecom, do you think that the members of this chamber would have a different opinion of the bill?
Well, I don't, could be, but we would not have a point to reference. We wouldn't have something to reference. So, you know, I've been clear, I make no bones about the fact that I'm not a fan of the UN. And when I say I don't care what we call this, I don't care what we call this, but we have to have something to be able to reference to.
Right. I just pointed out, just because it seems like when we have a potential consideration or threat for erosion of property rights, we're quick to action, but when we have an actual erosion of property rights, when we did the telecom bills as they came through, and I supported them because I thought it was reasonable compromises to get us to the point that we got them to, but essentially we treat what really is happening differently than what could happen. And I just point that out as just a matter of you know, discussion, that you know, we should look at all this in that scope. So, well,
I think you and I have proven that we have the ability to work together on some of these things.
Certainly do.
And if there is a gap there between, you know, what we say and what we do, then I'm happy to explore that gap and figure out how to close it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Senator Sylvie.
Mr. Chairman, to inquire. So I'm looking at the bill, and I tend to be a fan of simplicity and agree with the overall concept, but it seems to me that if you look at line 5, neither the state of Missouri nor any political subdivision shall adopt or implement policy recommendations that deliberately or inadvertently infringe or restrict private property rights without due process. Couldn't you just put a period there and be done with the bill?
You know, I have thought about that, and it's not that I'm closed-minded to that, because it has actually gone through my mind and my consideration. I guess my only bit of concern with that is, in the absence of something to refer back to, I'm just not sure that we have as strong of a bill. So I will tell you, I'm open-minded about that. I just don't know that in the absence of something to refer back to, I don't know that we've accomplished.
Yeah, I guess my thought would be that by putting something there, you imply that by omission, it might be okay to infringe someone's property rights for a different reason, not enumerated in this bill.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And you know, when we look at our other, you know, like when we have this discussion, we had a discussion in the House several years back. I don't remember if you were still with us over there, if you were here yet, but about religious freedom, and we talked about the idea of God, and then people wanted to start defining, or Allah, or Vishnu, or whatever. And at a certain point, it's better to just be broad, I think.
Well, so, and I think that's a valid point, and you know, I think as we go through this, you know, obviously, when this bill is exected, it'll be from this committee, and those kind of discussions will certainly be on the table. And I'm not closed-minded to that. I think some of our experts, which I've not discussed that exact thing with some of our experts, so they may want to chime in on that a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's all I wanted to raise, the idea that it shouldn't be right to infringe on anyone's property rights regardless of whether it's for this reason or a different reason which we would, by omission, not have in the statute.
Right, and that, you know, it actually, your point even goes back to the way I've argued about, you know, what our federal government should and should not do, because, you know, what our federal government should do is spelled out in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and if it's not listed there, then it, in my opinion, means that they shouldn't do it. So maybe we do tread on thin ice when we start actually naming things like that. I'm open to the process. I'd be interested in hearing what some of our experts say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lively.
Mr. Chairman, have you noticed that when I'm chairing the committee, none of those shenanigans go on like that?
Never noticed.
I was being disrupted momentarily. I'm going to make this a question. Actually, it's a statement. It's going to be a question to you. Senator Nishi's gone, but I was hoping she'd be here. Are you aware that National Park Service is actually taking lots of people's property down in my district? You know, we're working on it right now. Are you aware of that?
I am unfortunately aware of that.
Yes. Yeah, it's 100 and some miles worth. opposing access, taking family farms, it's been in generations and generations, just an extension thereof. And we're right in the middle of that battle right now with the Ozark National St. River levies.
And that
With the National Park Service. I just want to make sure you were aware of that. And
Yeah, just to make sure that, that's the federal government that's doing that, right?
yes, that is the federal government, yes. Yes, that is the federal
I can't imagine why we don't.
So far, I haven't seen anybody down with UN on the back of their shirts yet, but we've been looking.
Did you look to see if they had tattooed?
I will. Thank you, Senator.
Senator Holzman.
This is my last question. Did you check with the NRA on this bill before you brought it before us? I hate to have to reconsider it once we get through.
Do you have any witnesses you would like to call?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I have any witnesses that want to come before this. I would start with Mr. Ike Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senators. I appreciate this time. I would ask that you support SB 618. And many try to diminish Agenda 21. And they call folks like myself tinfoil hat wearers and conspiracy theorists and things of this nature. But we're not. And Senator Steed mentioned it is 350 pages. This is a document, Agenda 21. It is actually real. Although it never was ratified by the United States Senate, Agenda 21 is being implemented in the United States and through various federal government agencies and throughout the federal government through the President's Council on Sustainable Development in 1992, or 93, excuse me. And the reason you don't necessarily hear about it as Agenda 21, because of an advisor by the name of J. Gary Lawrence was an advisor to the President. He's also a chief planner for the city of Seattle and the former director of the Center for Sustainable Communities. It says, in the case of the United States, our local authorities are engaged in planning processes consistent with Local Agenda 21, but there is little interest in using the Local Agenda 21 brand. So, we call our processes something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. This just lets you know that Agenda 21 processes are absolutely in the United States through these processes. Many of these processes that they put in play are absolutely less than sustainable. Sustainable development schemes from green energy, wind, solar, they will never really support our energy use in this country. Some adaptation might be fine, but we find now that a lot of windmills are sitting idle because they're too expensive to spend, or excuse me, too expensive to fix. Solyndra was a lot of money poured into these things, and we know what came of that. Sustainable development schemes are being implemented through our regional planning commissions. You asked about due process. The money is being funneled from the federal government down through these regional planning commissions and into our city governments and local communities. And unfortunately, a lot of the members of these local communities never hear about some of these things that are going on. And the biggest problem we have are through the memorandums of understanding through the federal government's various agencies that allow this money to funnel through. A lot of the properties are not necessarily taken, but they are regulated to a point where you can't even use them for your own purposes. And I think in some respects that's actually worse. Because if a government entity would come along through eminent domain and say, well, we want to expand this green area or this conservation area, they would have to give you fair market value for that piece of property. However, through a regulatory scheme, there's no compensation. I'll give you a quick example, and then I'll open for questions or just be done with my time. In Lee Summit, Missouri, they recently went through what's known as the M150 corridor overlay. Through that process, and there were some meetings, it was not widely let out to the public that these meetings were even happening. Clarion Associates and others bring these monies down through the planning commissions. And part of the process there was if you owned 3 to 5 acres of land and had maybe a single home on that land. Right now, that is grandfathered in. They wouldn't tell you to change anything. But let's say, for instance, you wanted to take that land and maybe take an acre and give it to one of your children and let them build a single home on it. As soon as you subdivided that, you would no longer be able to do so because the rules are put in play that now you would have to have mixed-use, high-density, multi-purpose buildings on that ground. So you could not use your property as you choose to in some of those instances. And these things do happen all across the country. I would just ask that you participate in supporting SB 618. And as far as Agenda 21 Sustainable Development is concerned, America is one of the few countries that are actually participating in this process. A lot of the other countries have exempted themselves, such as China, India, and others that are emerging countries. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Skelton, would you please be sure to turn in a witness form? Does anyone have any questions, Senator Holzman?
Thank you. Well, thank you for traveling to Jefferson City today and sharing your thoughts. But I have to say this is exactly why I have a problem with this bill. It's not just about property rights. In your statement, you said that renewable energy, sun and wind power, can't possibly prepare our country's needs, and it's just incorrect. And Solyndra was a manufacturing issue where they couldn't deliver the time and space product for the cost that it was. It had nothing to do with the technology being capable. Now, right now, renewable energy is intermittent, and we have issues with baseload factors, but we are in the process of having battery storage and all sorts of things that would levelize the power production, and renewable energy will be the future. And it scares me that it's so easy to transition something that's written in that document right there that all of a sudden creates an antagonist to something that senators like myself and even Senator Nieves, who has had conversations about the future of solar power and wind power to displace coal. Coal is a finite fossil fuel. We cannot continue to subsist on it past, my kids' generation. And essentially, you're using in your statement this agenda to defame a technology that will happen and has to happen. And if we pass this and someone were to say, well, we can't do solar and wind now because Agenda 21 said it was a good idea, that's a problem for me.
Being an individual that would help try to work some of these issues through, I don't believe that would be, because if a local community wanted to do something with wind or solar, they would be absolutely their authority and rights to do so, and there's no issue with that for me.
I know that you utilized this opportunity to take a derogatory stance towards a technology that I vehemently disagree with, its ability to provide our power. You made the statement, sun and wind cannot provide us the power we need.
That's my personal opinion.
Well, I was the chairman of the Renewable Energy Committee for 2 years in the House before I was elected to the Senate, and I can tell you that, we can show you studies after studies, I'm not here to argue with you, that is not only not going to happen, but this, we're 83% dependent on coal right now. That will change over the next 50 years. By the time, I'm ready to leave planet Earth, I'm hopeful that we will have a clean, sustainable, green energy future. It's a national security issue. It has nothing to do with, it does have something to do with the environment, but for my interest, it has something to do with sovereignty, with controlling our own power.
I would definitely agree with that.
And from that standpoint, I believe it's a paramount project to get us off of dependency from foreign oil and other resources. And you utilized this time to say that this wasn't a good cause because of that agenda. And that's what worries me about this. Because folks are going to siege upon the fact that we're trying to protect property rights, and then they're going to go into other agendas that they have, rather it be anti-renewables, rather it be anti-sustainable growth, or whatever it might be, and they'll think, oh, those buzzwords are located in that document, therefore they must be wrong.
I'm definitely not opposed to renewable resources and solar and wind. Again, that is not my concern. Yes, I did mention those things, and mostly that's because of the money that's flowing, and we're broke at the federal level. We're just dead broke. $17 trillion in debt.
Okay.
And, so it is an issue, and unfortunately, Agenda 21 is that broad in a lot of respects. At the local communities, it does boil down to the property rights. Absolutely.
At this point, I'd like to inform the committee that we're short on time, and so I would like to ask how many individuals would be wishing to testify in favor of this bill? How many are wishing to testify in opposition to this bill? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, at this point, well, Senator Bobby, you had a question, but
I'm a team player. I'm going to yield my time.
oh, okay. I would then at this point ask if there are any other questions of this witness. Seeing none, let's have someone from the opposition come up and testify. And I would also ask if we could try to keep it to 3 minutes or less.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Bill Gamble. I'm representing the city of Kansas City today. In opposition to the bill, I'm not going to talk about the UN or taking a property. Ours is more of a technical concern of the way the bill is drafted. If you look at the bill, it mentions that it says that local governments, political subdivisions, we can't enter into agreement for any sum of money for contracting of services, giving financial aid to those non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations as defined in Agenda 21. Now, in our examination of Agenda 21, we don't find those terms defined. So, in the bill it mentions it, they're not defined in Agenda 21, and in the bill it's not defined. So, here's our problem. Our mayor, our city council, has, it might be a little different than you'd like to think of other cities, but we engage with the private sector, we engage with organizations, we engage with the home builders, we engage with civic members, civic organizations, to get input on a variety of things, whether it's planning and zoning or other issues that development of the city, some of the more social concerns and aspects of healthcare, with our Truman Medical Center. And so within Agenda 21, the Economic and Social Council is involved in the voluntary implementation of this. And those non-governmental organizations that are in consultant status, just list you a few of those are the International Association of Lions Clubs, Kiwanis Clubs, the American Bar Association, the Cancer Society, the American Planning Association, the Girl Scouts, the National Home Builders Association. So what we want to do is we want to continue to do what we're doing in Kansas City right now. And maybe a closer, better definitions, more defined of what is prohibited and what isn't prohibited. Because we want to interact with these organizations, we want to support these organizations where it is appropriate for us to support those organizations financially, either through their input or support of the girls and boys clubs. And so as you go through that, you know, many times devil's in the details, and a little more detail in this legislation would allow us, and I would believe other cities in the state of Missouri, to continue to do what we are doing. So it's a different tack, but I think if you go through that scenario, I've had a couple of conversations. I thought about this long and hard, does this, and I think that this is certainly a valid argument. So I bring that committee, and I know that your astute legislative assistant said you have language, and certainly we'll go back and see if we have some type of language to do that. But I'd like for you to engage in consideration of this.
So, Mr. Ambo, you're going to work with our sponsor?
Yes.
I think.
And did you complete a witness form?
Yes, I did,
And
sir.
does anybody have any questions of the witness? Seeing none, thank you so much. Now, if we could have someone who would like to testify in favor of the legislation.
Mr. Chairman, could I mention something
Yes.
as they come up? I'm not sure if the audience is aware of the fact that we have to, by Senate rules, be done
Yes,
at
we
4
do
o'clock.
have, actually, we have until 5 after at this point. So if we could limit testimony to, say, 2 minutes at this point.
Hello, I'm Amy Fox. A year and a half ago, reading my son's science textbook, I learned that you and I were a threat to the planet, not only as individuals, but as a nation. And we needed a program out of the United Nations to save us from ourselves and save the planet at the same time. And here it is, Agenda for the 21st Century. It is the blueprint to inventory, monitor, and control all human activity and all natural resources. the ideology of sustainable development deems our cars, our private property, our single-family home, golfing, and sprawl as unsustainable. The International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, it's interesting that the gentleman didn't mention them as relationships with, but that is a non-government organization based in Bonn, Germany. My city that I live in, Lee Summit, Missouri, became a member of ICLEI in 2009. ICLEI was authorized by the United Nations to implement Agenda 21 at the local level. Milestone number 1, once you become an ICLEI member, is to inventory your greenhouse gases. All modes of transportation is inventoried. All forms of energy use of your community is inventoried. Water, gas, electric, etc. Milestone number 3 is a sustainability action plan or a climate action plan. Pages and pages of new regulation. Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to have to ask you to respond to questions. Or is there anyone wishing to? Senator,
can I get the ISBN number on the back of that book so I can order it and read it?
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon. I got it on Amazon.
I'm just going to get the ISBN number from you in the back. But we can do it offline.
Yeah, do that
I would love
offline.
that.
Thank you so
should be
much.
chapter 7.
And would you please make sure you filled out a witness form? And if we had another person that was going to testify in opposition to the bill, to be honest. So if you come up and tell the committee your name, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Sharp. I'm a member of the City Council of Kansas City, Missouri. And the City Council did unanimously pass a resolution, Resolution 140065, opposing this legislation and legislation like it. And our main concern was, as Mr. Gamble pointed out, subsection 3 of this, which prohibits political subdivisions from contracting with, receiving funds from any organizations that are very nebulously defined. It says it's defined in Agenda 21. I have looked through Agenda 21. I can't tell you I'm an expert on it at all. But there are numerous organizations, non-governmental organizations, that have consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the UN. They include groups like the Girl Scouts, the American Library Association, the YWCA, the NAACP, and these are groups whose local chapters we work with. So if Section 3 wasn't in there, that would certainly address a lot of our concerns. And just as a private person in listening to the testimony today, I have to agree with what Senator Sylvie brought up. To say you can't infringe or restrict private property rights without due process if it's required by Agenda 21, it kind of implies, well, you can do it for other reasons. So maybe if a period could be put after process on line 8, that seems to me to be a broader and better concept. I don't know that you need a law to say you can't do these things anyway, because they're prohibited by the Constitution, but I certainly don't, personally, I don't see any harm in saying that. But to say you can't do it just for this thing kind of implies you can do it for other reasons, and I don't know that you want to send that message.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Does anyone have any questions of the witness? Senator Sylvie.
Just briefly, Councilman,
Yes, sir.
what years were you in the legislature?
Well, back when I had hair, 72 to 82.
I just wanted to remind the senators that you had been in our seat at one point as well.
Long time ago.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
nobody would remember unless you did.
Okay, now, I don't believe there was any other person wishing to testify in opposition. Is that correct? So all we had left were proponents. They're ringing the bell. I'm sorry? Oh, was there anybody wishing to testify on an informational basis? Did any of the proponents have anything that was new material that hadn't been covered? I don't think so. We have one gentleman here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Philip Todd. I'm resident of Callaway County, Missouri. I'm here to speak in favor of the bill. My concerns are is that we have too many non-governmental organizations